These videos will make you question everything. So remember, this is for entertainment purposes only. Let's check it out.
Welcome back, America. We're here with Dr. Thomas Sowell. The book is Social Justice Fallacies. I want to encourage you to go to Amazon.com and grab a copy. Any major bookstore should have a copy. And it is very readable, and it is worth reading, particularly now during these times. Dr. Sowell, when we talk about equality, immediately race pops into mind. It's always about race, racial discrimination, about the founding of the nation, white dominant society, so forth and so on. And you make the case, and you've made this case throughout your life, but it's very poignant in your book, which is, wait a minute, of course this has some impact, but it's not the only thing that has an impact. But why? First of all, what other things have an impact? It's probably an infinite list of things. And secondly, why do they only focus on race on the left?
I guess it's because that's proven to be a politically popular thing to do. But in point of fact, one of the things that's mentioned in the book is a study that was done by the New York Times, of all people, some years ago, where they tried to show the 10 poorest counties in the United States. And they mentioned which ones they were and so on. It turns out that 6 of those 10 counties had a population that was from 90% to 100% white. Now, in the New York Times, they didn't mention the race of the people, but once they told me the counties, I looked it up. And in fact, I followed the average income in those 6 counties over a span of 50 years. And in all those 50 years, all 6 of those counties had a median income lower than the median income of Black Americans. Now, and so the people in those counties faced zero racism because they were white and indistinguishable from all other whites. They didn't have a legacy of slavery, and yet there they were. You have to ask then, clearly there must be other things that cause poverty. We can't just assume that because people of a given race have more poverty than some other people, that race must be the reason. But this has become the automatic kind of thing, and I think most people would be quite surprised. One of the things that happens is that behavior matters, and you see that in so many different ways. For example, I think most people would be surprised to learn that despite the fact that blacks as a whole have a higher poverty rate than whites as a whole, Black married couple families have for more than a quarter of a century, every single year, had a poverty rate under 10%. And in most of those years, the national poverty rate was not as low as 10%. So it's not and you say, well, this is due to institutional racism. In that case, does that mean that the racists make an exception for blacks who are married? I mean, do racists either know or care whether blacks are married? None of these glib explanations stands up to the slightest empirical study.
And that's a great point. Very, very great point. And it lends itself to the fact that a lot of times when we get these studies and information, they exclude certain things. You know what I mean? When they give you these statistics that they may throw your way, it's excluding maybe married couples. It could be excluding this, that, and the third. And there's no way for us to say to them when they're giving out these statistics, hey, does that include? No, they just throw them out and people react and they get the response that they're looking for to control and manipulate the people in the direction that they want, to cause chaos, to create this back and forth, which we don't need. So that's an interesting statistic that he just threw out.
Explanations stands up to the slightest empirical study.
And let's talk about this when it comes to minorities generally. You have an Asian population in this country that achieves a lot as a group, intellectually, education-wise. And they are discriminated against by these Ivy League colleges, by Harvard. We just had a Supreme Court decision and so forth, the way Jews were 100 years earlier, by Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and so forth. So the people who push this race issue, is it that they really care about black people or Asian people or Jewish people, or is it that it's just another wedge issue to try and destroy this culture and destroy this society?
There are some people who are both. Some really believe it, and I feel sorry for them. But there are some who really don't care. If it gets them elected, that's what matters. And this is one of the tragedies of trying to politicize race. There are so many fallacies that it's hard to even know which one to take up. But for example, the great narrative is that blacks rose from poverty, got into professional occupations as a result of the 1960s social welfare programs. And that this has been a big benefit. One of the problems with this way of looking at things is that everything depends on when you pick as the start of this trend. If you go back to 1940, that is 20 years before these wonderful things are supposed to have happened in the 1960s, and you discover that the degree to which blacks were in poverty declined from 87% in 1940 to 47% in 1960. So it went down by 40 points in those 20 years. Now you look at the 20 years following 1960, they went down 18 points. And so the trend did not begin in the 1960s. The trend was there before then, and the trend did not even accelerate after 1960. Many people think that it would all began with the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Well, that was a fine act to get rid of the segregation laws in the South. But the cold fact is that the percentage of blacks who had professional occupations doubled from 1954 to 1964. That is in the decade ending at the time that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed. If you look at the things that are negative, like, for example, black children being raised in single-parent households. In 1940, just under 17% of black kids were raised in one-parent families. But after 1960s, before the end of the century, 4 times that many, 68% of black kids were being raised in one-parent families. And that does not depend on racism or any of the other things they talk about. It depends upon things that happened due to the policies of the 1960s, which are still going forward.
Which encourage the dissolution of the family. It's just unbelievable. Dr. Soul, when we return, my big question for you is, as a nation, where do we go from here?
Good question.
How do we start down that road? We'll be right back.
See, these are the conversations that need to be had. I don't care which side you're from, left or right, whatever you want to call it. You know what I mean? These are the conversations that need to be had. How do we remove that out of our, you know what I mean? How do we remove race and different things out of the conversation where people see, how do we see each other as that? And politicians use it as a tool to further their political gain. How do we remove the hatred between this party, this race, this person, that person? How do we do that to progress forward? That's the questions. That's the conversations that need to be happening, bro. Because if not, then we're not going anywhere. And we're going to continue to destroy each other. We're going to continue to have this big divide. And with all of the chaos going on in the world, bro, we need to be together on everything. Like, we need to come at the time and stage that we're in. We work a lot better together and benefit from that than being separate.
Be open, but turn over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zuckerberg, let me start with you. Did I hear you say in your opening statement that there's no link between mental health and social media use?
Senator, what I said is I think it's important to look at the science. I know it's people widely talk about this as if that is something that's already been proven. And I think that the bulk of the scientific evidence does not support that.
Well, really, let me just remind you of some of the science from your own company. Instagram studied the effect of your platform on teenagers. Let me just read you some quotes from the Wall Street Journal's report on this. Company researchers found that Instagram is harmful for a sizable percentage of teenagers, most notably teenage girls. Here's a quote from your own study. Quote, "We make body image issues worse for 1 in 3 teen girls." Here's another quote. "Teens blamed Instagram," this is your study, "for increases in the rate of anxiety and depression. This reaction was unprompted and consistent across all groups." That's your study.
Senator, we try to understand the feedback and how people feel about the services. We can improve.
Wait a minute.
them.
Your
I think
own
those studies are-
study says that you make life worse for 1 in 3 teenage girls. You increase
Senator, that's not
anxiety
what it
and
says.
depression. That's what it says. And you're here testifying to us in public that there's no link. You've been doing this for years. For years, you've been coming in public and testifying under oath that there's absolutely no link. Your product is wonderful. The science is nascent, full speed ahead, while internally, you know full well your product is a disaster for teenagers.
Senator,
and yet
that's
you
not
keep
true.
right on doing what you're doing. Right?
That's not true. That's not true.
Let me show you some other facts I know that you're familiar with. Wait a minute. That's not a question. That's not a question. Those are facts, Mr. Zuckerberg. That's not a question.
Those aren't facts.
Let me show you some more facts. Here's some information from a whistleblower who came before the Senate, testified under oath in public. He worked for you. It's a senior executive. Here's what he showed he found when he studied your products. So, for example, this is girls between the ages of 13 and 15 years old. 37% of them reported that they had been exposed to nudity on the platform unwanted in the last 7 days. 24% said that they had experienced unwanted sexual advances they'd been propositioned in the last 7 days. 17% said they had encountered self-harm content pushed at them in the last 7 days. Now, I know you're familiar with these stats because he sent you an email where he lined it all out. I mean, we've got a copy of it right here. My question is, who did you fire for this? Who got fired because of that?
Senator, we study all this because it's important and we want to improve our services.
Well, you just told me
And
a
I think
second
that
ago
the-
you studied that there was no linkage. Who did
Senator,
you fire?
I said you mischaracterized.
37% of teenage girls between 13 and 15 were exposed to unwanted nudity in a week on Instagram. You knew about it. Who did you fire?
Senator, this is why we're building all
Who
these
did you
different
fire?
tools. Senator, I don't think that's.
Who did you fire?
I'm not going to answer that.
Because you didn't fire anybody, right? You didn't take any significant
I don't think
action.
it's appropriate to talk about like
It's not
individual
appropriate.
HR decisions.
Do you know who's
like
sitting
that.
behind you? You've got families from across the nation whose children are either severely harmed or gone, and you don't think it's appropriate to talk about steps that you took? The fact that you didn't fire a single
happy
person?
to-
Let me
happy
ask you
to
this.
talk
Let me
about
ask you
steps
this.
that we took.
Have you
Let me
compensated
speak.
any of the victims?
Sorry,
Have you compensated any of the victims? These girls, have you compensated them?
I don't believe so.
Why not? Don't you think they deserve some compensation for what your platform was done? Help with.
Wait, the way Mark Zuckerberg looks right now, I don't think he's the person that should be up here answering these questions, because even though they're not even allowing him to speak pretty much, it looks bad. It looks bad. Like, I'm interested to see, and I know some people probably don't care, but I like to see from a stock market standpoint what the stock is doing as well. But this is crazy. And these numbers and statistics that the senator is providing involving these girls, the other video we checked out that was involving children, this is insane how this algorithm is working and what it's doing and what it's promoting and who it's promoting it to, and how it's not being taken down and not being caught. Like, there's no type of regulations. This stuff is like the Wild Wild West. How is this stuff not regulated like that? If you or I put up a piece of content, I know for sure, me, if we put up some content that's even remotely obscure and has any type of unwanting things or things that are deemed a violation based upon the terms and agreements of this platform, will be taken down immediately. How are these platforms allowed to continuously move? How is not what's good for the goose not good for the gander?
Counseling services help with dealing with the issues that your services cause?
Our job is to make sure that we build tools to help keep people safe.
Are you
across
going
our
to compensate them?
Senator, our job and what we take seriously is making sure that we build industry-leading tools to find harmful
To
content,
make money.
take it off the services,
To make money.
and to build tools that empower parents.
So you
that
didn't
help
take
work
any
people.
action. You didn't
That's
take
not
any
true,
action.
Senator.
You didn't fire anybody. You haven't
That's not
compensated
true.
a
That's
single
not-
victim.
that's
Let
not
me
what I
ask you
said.
this. Let me ask you this. There's families of victims here today. Have you apologized to the victims? Would you like to do so now?
Well,
They're here. You're on national television. Would you like now to apologize to the victims who have been harmed by your product? Show them the pictures.
Oh,
Would you like to apologize for what you've done to these good people?
whoa.
I'm sorry for everything that you have all gone through. Terrible. No one should have to go through the things that your families have suffered. And this is why we invest so much and are going to continue doing industry-leading efforts to make sure that no one has to go through the types of things that your families have had to suffer.
You know, why, Mr. Zuckerberg, why should your company not be sued for this? Why is it that you can claim, you hide behind a liability shield, you can't be held accountable? Shouldn't you be held accountable personally? Will you take personal responsibility?
Senator, I think I've already answered this. I mean, these
Well,
are
try
serious
this again.
issues.
Will you take personal responsibility?
Senator, I view my job and the job of our company as building the best tools that we can to keep our community safe.
Well, you're failing at
and
that.
Well, Senator, we're doing an industry-leading effort. We build AI tools
nonsense. Your product is killing people. Will you personally commit to compensating the victims? You're a billionaire. Will you commit to compensating the victims? Will you set up a compensation fund
Senator,
with your
I
money?
think these are
With your money.
complicated- Senator, these are complicated
Yes, no,
issues.
that's not a complicated question, though. That's a
Senator,
yes or no.
this is-
Will you set up a victims' compensation fund with your money, the money you made on these families sitting behind you? Yes or no?
Senator,
Goodness. I know somebody on this team wants to stand up and be like, bro, we need a timeout. Time out. He need time to breathe. This senator is grilling him. You know what I mean? How do you like your Mark Zuckerberg steak right now? Well done, medium rare? How do you getting it any way you want to right now? This is, whoo. This, I ain't gonna tell you what I want to call this right now, a modern day what I want to call it, but sheesh, he's getting kebabbed right now.
I don't think that's my job is to
Sounds
make
like
sure
a
that we
no.
build good tools. My
Sounds
job
like a
is
no.
to make sure that
Your job is to be responsible for what your company has done. You've made billions of dollars on the people sitting behind them. Are you here? You've done nothing to help them. You've done nothing to compensate them. You've done nothing to put it right. You could do so here today, and you should.
Meta surprising Wall Street by issuing its first ever dividend. Could this be a sign of mega caps maturing? And which others might be next? That's the focus of today's Tech Check with Deirdre Bosa. Hi, Dee.
Hey, Courtney. Well, let's talk first about why Meta's dividend was such a surprise to the street, because it really represents potentially this broader shift within tech in Silicon Valley. It used to be that tech companies, they're growthy, they're innovative, they were going to reinvest every dollar of profit back into the business. That mentality met the mentality of the year of efficiency led by Zuckerberg himself. And here you go. We're at Facebook, Meta, issuing a dividend, which made us kind of think, who could be next? So we looked at the capital allocation plans of the Super Six. We left Tesla aside for now. You can see that Apple and Microsoft, they've had robust capital return plans.
So the reason why I wanted to hear this after hearing the back and forth between the senator and Mark Zuckerberg is you're hearing all of the negative right now. Now you're going to hear what they're doing as far as the stock goes, right? You're hearing that now. And to see what's to come amongst all this back and forth between Mark Zuckerberg and the senator and what happens to the company. Now, this is a good example to see whether or not the investors, whether or not the shareholders, whether or not people care about this. It's all well and good to get up in front of them and talk on the stage and act like it, but let's see it does it affect the company?
For a long time, for decades. The kind of glaring omissions here, remaining especially after Meta, that's Google and Amazon. Amazon, of course, is almost 30 years old, but it didn't really become profitable until 2015. This quarter, everything kind of came together. Huge operating income, better margins in its e-commerce business, a growing cash pile. So it probably could issue a dividend. The question is, will it? Amazon is still known very much to reinvest back in the business like it did during the pandemic, doubling its logistics footprint. Google, that is an interesting one because Alphabet has done a share buyback, but it's resisted calls for a dividend, and that may be harder to do going forward. Alphabet is kind of your classical Silicon Valley, right? It has its Other Bets unit, which looks at big moonshotty projects, but this year has certainly been indication that Google is getting more fit, more efficient. So does that mean potentially that dividends could be next? It's possible, guys. Anything is possible now that Meta did it.
Let me turn to Sarat, if I might, Dee, for just a moment. How much more appealing would Alphabet or Amazon be to you if they paid a dividend?
So I think this signal, and one of the reasons I think Meta's up where it is because what do they signal? Capital discipline. If you're going to return, at least in the United States, if you initiate a dividend, you don't cut it back. It's not a flexible dividend.
It's not we'll do it this quarter, but not next quarter.
Right. So what does that tell investors? It tells us that they're going to actually have a minimum hurdle of this, and we're going to look for it to grow. So that tells you this company's now looking at, maybe the moonshots aren't really out there. It's also telling you that they're not going to spend money just on acquisitions that maybe don't make any sense. Plus, we know that's really not working these days with the government. So I think if Google did one of those, I think it'd be really good. One of the reasons Google stock didn't do as well, it's not because they didn't have really good expectations. They also said we're increasing our CapEx. And we're now in the year of, I call it the year of cash flow. Because if you say our cash flow is going to be less than it's supposed to be or we think it is, you're going to actually get punished. I mean, look at Charter Communications today. Look at some of the stocks that have said. I mean, Microsoft also said that and didn't do as well. But when you're saying we're returning capital to shareholders, we're going to start a dividend, you're signaling to your investors that we're really focused on shareholder value. And I think that signal, if it came from Google, it would tell people, "Oh, wait a second, you're not doing all this
They're
other
not going to do all this
the Waymo,
pie in the sky stuff
that back in the day
may not pay off."
Exactly. 2 or 3 years ago when interest rates were zero and we're just trying to grow revenue and try and find. But you have now good growing businesses that are high cash flow. It's not saying they're maturing, but you're focused on enhancing the growth.
But maybe the management's maturing.
That's right.
You hear that, right? Just take all it, listen to what they're saying.
Very true. So
Deirdre, you want to jump in?
Yeah, the other thing I would add is, yes, it shows discipline, but the reason why tech companies haven't returned a dividend is because there's this thinking that they know best. They know how to keep innovating. But in the case of these mega caps, they've shown over the last few years that they can return capital to investors and they can keep innovating. They can walk and chew gum at the same time because think about it. Sarat even said it with the CapEx numbers. They continue to invest in the business. They continue to stay ahead in generative AI and spatial computing while returning investors. So you don't have one at the expense of others. And that's also an indication of just how incredibly profitable these companies have become. Yes, their weighting in the broader markets has increased, but they've also been able to execute on that.
All right, Deirdre, thank you very much. Deirdre Bosa, Sarat Sethi.
So when you hear Mark Zuckerberg, he was trying to get it out. We're continuing to develop things and trying to fix and rectify and correct the situation and continue to fight against these things. You know what I mean? This is what kind of he's alluding to as well, that they have the ability to do that while also taking care of their shareholders, their stock investors, everything like that as well. You know what I mean? So this all plays a part in this whole gumbo of mess that they have going on. So I want y'all to see every aspect of it, not just listening to them, pay attention to the company as well. All right? Listen, man, y'all get at me in the comment section. Let me know what you thought of this video. And till the next one, I'm gone.